bread slipped slightly in his hands as he leaned closer to the counter, squinting down at the coins spread out in front of him. Pennies, nickels, a couple of worn bills, folded and unfolded so many times they looked tired. He lined the coins up carefully, as if precision might somehow make them add up to more than they were. The cashier watched in silence. So did everyone else. The store was bright, clean, ordinary, one of those neighborhood places people visit without thinking. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A scanner beeped somewhere behind him. A shopping cart squeaked as someone shifted their weight in line. But right here, at this counter, time slowed to an uncomfortable crawl. The old man's hands trembled as he counted again. Once. Twice. He exhaled softly through his nose, the kind of breath people take when they already know the answer, but aren't ready to accept it. His jacket was worn at the elbows, the fabric faded from years of use. A small pin caught the light near his collar, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Most people weren't. He pushed the coins together into a small pile and nudged them toward the cashier. That should be enough, he said, though his voice didn't sound convinced. The cashier typed a number into the register, paused, then gently shook her head. It's still short, she said. The words landed heavier than they should have. A quiet ripple moved through the line behind him. Someone sighed. Someone else checked their phone. Another person shifted impatiently, eyes fixed anywhere but on the man at the counter. The veteran nodded slowly as if he'd expected this all along. Oh, he said. All right then. He reached for the bread, plain cheap, no brand worth mentioning, and slid it back across the counter. His fingers lingered on the plastic for just a second before letting go. I'll just leave it, he added, almost apologetically. Didn't mean to hold anyone up. No one spoke. The cashier hesitated, her hand hovering uncertainly over the loaf. The line stayed frozen, caught between impatience and something heavier, something no one wanted to name. The old man gathered his coins back into his palm, closing his fingers around them like he was afraid they might disappear. He lowered his eyes, shoulders rounding inward, and took a small step back from the counter. That was when a voice cut through the silence, not loud, not angry, just calm and completely unexpected. It was late morning, the kind of hour when the store wasn't busy but never quite empty either. Sunlight pushed through the front windows, casting pale rectangles across the tiled floor. The automatic doors opened and closed every few minutes, letting in brief gusts of warm air mixed with the sound of traffic outside. Nothing about the place felt important. That was the point. This wasn't a charity drive or a special event. It was just a regular day. The grocery store sat on the corner of a quiet street, the kind locals had been using for years. The shelves were neatly stocked, the aisles narrow but familiar. A radio played softly near the back, some old rock song half drowned out by the hum of refrigerators. Life moved on here at a steady, forgettable pace. The people in line were ordinary too. A woman with a basket of produce, a man in work boots holding a six-pack, a couple arguing in whispers over a shopping list. None of them had come here expecting to witness anything more than a quick transaction and a receipt. The old man stood out only because he didn't seem to belong to any hurry. He moved carefully, deliberately, as though rushing was no longer an option his body allowed. His boots were scuffed, his jeans creased and faded at the knees. The jacket he wore had seen better decades, its zipper slightly crooked, its fabric soft from years of wear. To most eyes, he looked like just another elderly customer on a fixed income. But there were details that told a quieter story. The way he stood straight despite his age, the way he waited his turn without complaint. The small metal pin near his collar, dull unpolished, but unmistakable to anyone who recognized it. A war veteran, not announced, not acknowledged, just present. He hadn't asked for help. He hadn't drawn attention to himself. He had picked up only what he needed, nothing more. One loaf of bread, no extras, no comfort items. Just enough to get through the day. The cashier was young, maybe in her early 20s, doing her best to remain professional, while something about the moment clearly unsettled her. She wasn't trained for this. No one was. The register didn't care about dignity or history or sacrifice. It only cared about numbers. Around them, the store continued as if nothing was wrong. A scanner beeped. A door chimed. A cart rolled by somewhere down the aisle, and yet, right there at the counter, the air felt heavier, like everyone sensed something important was unfolding, even if they didn't fully understand what it was yet. This was the calm before the turn. The old man opened his palm again and poured the coins back onto the counter, the metal clinking softly as they spread out. The sound was small, almost fragile, but in the quiet space it felt louder than it should have. He stared at them for a moment, as if seeing them for the first time, then began counting slowly, carefully, one coin at a time, His finger paused over a nickel, then slid it slightly to the side, grouping it with the others. He counted under his breath, lips barely moving. When he reached the end, he stopped, frowned, and started over. No one interrupted him. The cashier stood still, hands folded, eyes flicking between the register and the man's face. She could have rushed him. She didn't. The line behind him shifted again, shoes scraping against tile, patience thinning with every second that passed. The total on the screen didn't change. He sighed and rubbed his thumb against the edge of the counter, a small nervous habit. Then, almost reluctantly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled bill. He smoothed it with both hands and added it to the pile, as if hoping the gesture itself might persuade the numbers to cooperate. He counted again. Still short. His shoulders dropped a fraction, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. He glanced up at the cashier, offering a polite, embarrassed smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I might have miscalculated," he said quietly. "Haven't been great with numbers lately." It was a half joke, but no one laughed. Behind him, a woman checked her watch. Someone cleared their throat. The silence pressed in from all sides, heavy with discomfort. Everyone could see what was happening. No one wanted to be the first to acknowledge it. The man gathered the coins into a smaller pile this time, removing one, then another. He set them aside carefully, as if choosing which ones mattered least. His movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. Then he did something that made the moment sting. He reached for the bread. His hand hesitated just before touching it, hovering in the air for a second longer than necessary. When his fingers finally closed around the loaf, they tightened slightly, knuckles whitening beneath thin skin. He pulled it toward himself, then stopped. The cashier inhaled, ready to speak, but he beat her to it. "It's all right," he said. "I don't need it today." The words were calm, too calm. He slid the bread back across the counter and pushed it toward the cashier. The plastic crinkled softly, a small sound that felt final. "I'll come back another time," he added. Didn't mean to slow anyone down. No one moved. The register still glowed. The line still waited. But the space between them all felt wider now, stretched thin by a tension that had nowhere to go. And the worst part wasn't the money. It was the dignity quietly slipping away, right there in front of everyone. The silence didn't break when the bread was pushed back. It thickened. The people in line behind the old man shifted again, but this time the movement carried a different weight. What had started as mild impatience slowly hardened into something more uncomfortable, an unspoken pressure to make the moment end. One way or another, a man 2 places back exhaled sharply through his nose, loud enough to be heard. Another customer leaned forward just slightly, peering past the veteran as if trying to see how much longer this would take. Someone muttered under their breath, the words indistinct but the tone clear. "Hurry up." The veteran didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on the counter, his hands closing around the coins he'd already gathered back into his palm. He rolled them gently, as if the familiar weight might steady him. His jaw tightened, then relaxed. Years of discipline showed in that small restraint. The cashier glanced toward the line, then back at the man. Her smile had faded into something more careful now, professional, practiced, distant. She wasn't unkind. She was trapped between policy and humanity, and the line behind her was a reminder that the world rarely pauses for quiet moments like this. A woman farther back crossed her arms. Another shook her head slightly, not in anger, but in that subtle way people do when they decide a situation is inconvenient rather than tragic. Phones came out. Eyes dropped. Attention fractured. No one stepped forward. No one offered to help, not because they couldn't, but because helping would mean breaking the invisible rules of public space. It would mean acknowledging the man's struggle out loud, and that felt uncomfortable. The veteran took a small step back from the counter, clearing space, trying to make himself smaller. The movement was instinctive, learned long ago. Don't be a burden. Don't draw attention, don't take up space you haven't earned. "I'll move aside," he said softly. "Let the others go." The words landed hard. They weren't angry. They weren't bitter. They were resigned. The cashier hesitated again, her fingers hovering over the register. She wanted to say something, anything, but the eyes behind the veteran pressed forward, silently urging her to move on. A man near the front of the line glanced at the bread, then at the old man's back. He looked away quickly, as if afraid eye contact might obligate him to act. This was how judgment worked now. Not through shouting, not through insults, but through silence, through the way people pretended not to see. Through the way the moment was treated as an inconvenience instead of a human crisis. Through the shared, unspoken agreement that it was easier to look forward than to look at him. The veteran tucked the coins back into his pocket, his movements slow and careful. He adjusted his jacket, straightening it as though preparing himself for inspection. The small pin near his collar caught the light again, unnoticed by almost everyone. A man who had once stood in far worse lines, under far greater pressure, now waited quietly for permission to disappear. And just as the weight of that reality settled over the store, something shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible. Someone, somewhere behind the line, had been watching, and they were about to speak. For a moment, nothing happened. The kind of nothing that stretches, thin and uneasy, until it starts to feel loud. The veteran stood there, half turned away from the counter now, his decision already made. His shoulders were set, his posture straight, as if he were bracing for something that never quite came. The coins rested heavy in his pocket, pressing against the fabric like a reminder he couldn't ignore. The cashier finally reached for the bread. Her fingers touched the plastic, and the soft crinkle echoed far more than it should have. She paused, glancing up at the old man, searching his face for permission, or forgiveness, or something in between. He didn't look back. He kept his eyes forward, fixed on nothing in particular. The register screen dimmed slightly, waiting. Behind them, the line had gone still. No sighs now, no muttering. Even the restless shuffling had stopped, as if everyone sensed they were standing at the edge of something, though no one could say what. The radio near the back of the store clicked between stations, static hissing for a brief second before settling again. Somewhere down an aisle, a refrigerator compressor kicked on with a low hum. Ordinary sounds, but in that moment they felt amplified, intrusive. The veteran took one slow breath in, then another. He adjusted his jacket again, smoothing the front with both hands. The gesture was small, almost ceremonial, the way someone straightens themselves before stepping away, before surrendering a small piece of hope without making a scene. "I'll be out of the way," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. He took a step toward the side of the counter. The cashier's mouth opened slightly, as if she were about to protest, but the words never came. Training, policy, and pressure held her in place. The bread sat between them, untouched, a simple object carrying far more weight than it ever should have. Time felt suspended. This was the moment when most stories end quietly. No confrontation, no rescue. Just a man walking away with less than he came for. The veteran shifted his weight, preparing to leave the line entirely. His hand brushed the edge of the counter one last time, fingertips grazing the smooth surface, a farewell gesture so subtle no one noticed. No one, that is, except the person standing several steps behind him. Someone who had been watching the entire exchange. Someone who hadn't checked their phone. Someone who hadn't looked away. As the veteran began to move, a voice cut through the stillness. Not sharp, not raised, just steady. "Hey?" The single word stopped everything. The word didn't echo, but it landed. "Hey." It wasn't loud enough to startle anyone, yet it cut clean through the silence like a blade. Calm, grounded, certain. The kind of voice that didn't ask for attention, yet somehow commanded it anyway. The veteran froze mid-step. His hand, which had just brushed the counter, stopped moving. Slowly, he turned his head in the direction the voice had come from. So did the cashier. So did the people in line. One by one, as if pulled by the same invisible thread, every set of eyes shifted toward the back. The voice came again. "Put the bread back." No anger, no drama, just a statement. For a second, no one reacted. The cashier blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. The veteran's brow creased, confusion flickering across his face. He glanced down at the counter, then back toward the voice, as though trying to understand who would speak so plainly into a moment everyone else had been avoiding. The cashier cleared her throat. "I'm sorry," she said. The man in the back took a step forward, closing the distance slightly, but not rushing, not pushing. He moved with an ease that suggested he wasn't bothered by the attention, now slowly turning toward him. "I said." The voice repeated, just as steady. "Put the bread back," with his order. The cashier's eyes darted instinctively to the line, then back to the veteran, then finally to the man who had spoken. There was something about his tone that made it difficult to argue. Not authority exactly. Something older, something earned. The veteran shook his head faintly, reflexively. "That's all right," he said, turning fully now. "You don't have to, I know." The voice interrupted gently, not cutting him off, not dismissing him, just stopping the spiral before it could begin. "But I want to." That did it. The line murmured. A few people leaned forward. Phones that had been tucked away moments ago stayed put this time. Nobody wanted to miss what was happening now. The man stepped into clearer view. He wasn't dressed to impress. Dark clothes, round glasses, hair slightly untamed, like he'd given up trying to make it behave years ago. There was a familiarity to him that tugged at something in the back of people's minds, an almost recognition that made several heads tilt unconsciously. But no one said his name. Not yet. He stopped a respectful distance from the veteran, meeting his eyes directly. There was no pity in his expression. No spectacle. Just recognition, one human being seeing another. "You've already waited long enough," the man said. "Let's not make today harder than it needs to be." The veteran swallowed. His hands clenched at his sides, unsure what to do with themselves. Pride rose up first, quick and instinctive. "I'm fine," he said quietly. "Really, I'll manage." The man nodded once, acknowledging the words but not accepting them. "You've managed plenty," he replied. "Let someone else handle this part." The cashier stood frozen, the bread still resting on the counter between them like a test no one had prepared for. The man glanced at her then, offering a small, reassuring nod. "Please," he said. "Ring it all up." There was no argument left to make. The cashier slowly pulled the bread back toward the scanner. The beep that followed felt louder than before, sharper, like a signal that something irreversible had just begun. The veteran exhaled, a long breath he'd been holding without realizing it. His shoulders sagged slightly, not in defeat, but in relief, the kind that sneaks in when resistance finally gives way. The man stepped closer now, lowering his voice so only the veteran could hear. "Thank you for your service," he said simply. The words weren't ceremonial. They weren't rehearsed. They were quiet, and somehow that made them heavier. Around them, the store watched, sensing the shift. Whatever this moment had been before, it wasn't that anymore. The turn had been made, and no one would forget what came next. The moment the cashier scanned the bread, something subtle rippled through the store. It wasn't applause. It wasn't gasps. It was recognition, slow, creeping, almost reluctant. The man who had spoken stood quietly beside the veteran now, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes lowered as if he were just another customer waiting his turn. But people were looking harder now. Really looking. At the glasses. At the familiar posture. At the face that seemed to live somewhere deep in collective memory. A woman near the easel squinted, her head tilting slightly. "As that," she whispered, not finishing the sentence. The man in work boots leaned closer to see. His eyes widened just a fraction before he straightened abruptly. Suddenly aware of how he was standing, someone else inhaled sharply. Another took a step back, as if needing space to process what they were seeing. The veteran hadn't noticed yet. He was focused on the counter, on the register, on the quiet dignity of not making this moment bigger than it already was. His jaw remained set, his pride still fighting the unfamiliar sensation of being helped. The cashier, however, had noticed. Her hands trembled as she reached for the next item. She glanced up again, this time not with uncertainty, but with disbelief. Her eyes flicked to the man's face, then to his reflection in the glass behind the counter. Her breath caught. "Oh," she murmured. The man met her gaze and offered the faintest smile. Not a warning, not a request, just a gentle acknowledgement. That was enough, the whisper spread. "Ozzy, is that really him?" "No way." Phone stayed down, but heads leaned closer. The air changed. What had been an ordinary grocery store now felt suspended between reality and something surreal. The veteran finally looked up. He followed the cashier's gaze, then the direction of the stairs around him. His eyes landed on the man beside him, really seeing him for the first time. The glasses, the unmistakable features, the presence that didn't need volume to be felt. Recognition struck slowly, but when it did, it hit hard. His eyes widened. He stared for a beat too long, then shook his head once, as if rejecting the conclusion his mind was drawing. "No," he said softly. "That can't be Ryan." Chuckled under his breath, not dismissive, not proud. "J'afraid so," he replied. It landed. Ozzy Osbourne. Not on a stage. Not under lights. Not surrounded by security or spectacle. Just standing there, in line. In a grocery store. The veteran let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, though tears quickly blurred the edges of it. You're Ozzy Osbourne," he said, the words trembling with disbelief. Ozzy shrugged slightly, as if the name weighed less to him in this moment than it did to everyone else. "Most days," he said. "Right now, I'm just another guy who didn't like how this was going." A murmur moved through the line, respectful now, hushed. No one pushed forward. No one interrupted. Fame had arrived, yes, but it had done so quietly, following the rules of the room rather than bending them. The veteran shook his head again, overwhelmed. "I couldn't let you," he began. Ozzy raised a hand gently, stopping him. Not with force, with care. "This isn't about me," he said, "and it's not charity." He gestured subtly to the pin on the veteran's jacket, catching the light once more. "You've already earned more than anyone in this room," he added. Let me do this. The veteran's throat tightened. His shoulders trembled once before he could steady them. Years of discipline, years of holding it together, now tested by a kindness he hadn't asked for and didn't know how to refuse. The cashier finished ringing up the items, her movements slow, reverent almost. She looked at Ozzy again, waiting. Ozzy reached into his pocket without ceremony and placed his card on the counter. No cameras, no announcement, just an action. As the payment went through, the veteran bowed his head, overwhelmed, not by the money, but by the recognition. By the fact that someone he'd never met had seen him, when so many others had looked away. The store stood still. Because everyone understood now. This wasn't a celebrity moment, it was a human one. Ozzy didn't pause. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and laid a card on the counter with a casual certainty that belied the gravity of the moment. The cashier's fingers hovered above it for a second, uncertain, but Ozzy's quiet nod made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. It was already happening. The register beeped as she swiped his card. The total cleared, and for a moment, the veteran simply stared at the screen, unable to process that the coins he had painstakingly counted were no longer needed. His hands trembled slightly, still resting on the counter, as if afraid to let go of the remnants of pride he had clutched so tightly. Ozzy didn't speak. He let the action speak for him, but the impact was immediate. People in the line shifted their gaze, unsure whether to look or turn away, caught somewhere between disbelief and awe. The woman with the basket of produce pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes wide. The man in work boots stared at the floor, as if he were witnessing something sacred. Silence filled the store, heavy and expectant. Then Ozzy leaned slightly forward. He picked up a small basket on the counter, not for show, not for cameras, and began scanning a few extra items. Milk, eggs, butter. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy, just necessities. He handed them to the cashier as if this was a routine purchase. But in reality, it was a lifeline, a way of silently telling the veteran that someone saw him, truly saw him, and would carry the burden for a moment. The veteran's eyes flicked from the screen to Ozzy's hands, to the extra items being placed in a bag. He shook his head faintly, lips trembling. I can't accept this, he whispered almost to himself. Ozzy lifted a hand gently, stopping him. His tone was calm, almost soft, but carried a weight that left no room for argument. Yes, you can, he said. You've carried more than your share already. Today, I've got this. The veteran swallowed hard, pride battling gratitude, until he realized the resistance was pointless. Ozzy's presence wasn't performative. He wasn't here to make a scene, to draw attention, to collect admiration. He was here to act quietly, decisively, and with purpose. The cashier bagged the groceries, scanning each item while keeping her eyes on Ozzy. She wasn't watching a rock star. She was watching a human being who understood the weight of another human being's life. The veteran's coins, neatly returned to his pocket, suddenly seemed insignificant, almost tender remnants of a time when independence meant everything. Ozzy swiped for the final transaction, covering the rest of the grocery bill without a second thought. He set a few bills aside as extra, telling the cashier to give them to the veteran directly, so that he could have a little extra for himself: milk, bread, anything he needed without worry. The veteran's eyes brimmed with tears now, unsteady and bright. He lowered his head, unsure whether to speak to thank, or to simply let the moment settle in. Words seemed inadequate, unnecessary. Ozzy's action had said everything: respect, dignity, and acknowledgement. People around the store began to exhale quietly, relief and admiration mingling in the air. A young boy watching from the end of the line whispered something to his mother. The cashier gave a small, unsteady nod, a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of what had just happened. Ozzy didn't linger. He gathered his items, motioned to the cashier with a simple nod, and began to step away. There was no fanfare, no lingering look for the cameras, no announcement. Just action. Quiet, decisive human action. The veteran, still processing, finally looked up. His hands trembled as he clutched the bag of groceries. Pride wrestled with gratitude, but for the first time that morning, he felt relief, not just in the bread, but in being seen. The store had returned to normal, but nothing about it felt ordinary anymore. Every person who had witnessed the scene carried the memory in a way that couldn't be erased. Ozzy Osbourne had walked into a quiet store, seen a man struggling, and done what anyone should have done, but no one did. And in doing so, he had turned an ordinary moment into something unforgettable. The veteran stepped back, bag in hand, eyes still wide, and whispered a single word under his breath. Thank you. Ozzy didn't respond. He simply walked out, leaving the lesson, the kindness, and the dignity intact for everyone left behind to witness. The store remained silent, the echo of what had just happened hanging in the air. Proof that true humanity doesn't require a stage, a microphone, or applause. It only requires courage, awareness, and action. The veteran clutched the bag of groceries to his chest, his hands shaking as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. He looked up at Ozzy Osbourne, not as a rock star, not as a celebrity whose face graced magazine covers, but as a human being who had seen him when so many others had turned away. His chest rose and fell rapidly, and for a moment, it seemed like the weight of years, the wars, the sacrifices, the lonely days of struggle, was pressing down all at once. His lips moved, forming words that refused to leave his throat. I don't know what to say," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. Pride wrestled with gratitude, a lifetime of independence fighting against the raw kindness offered to him so freely. Ozzy, standing just a step away, didn't rush him. He let the silence stretch, understanding that this wasn't about words. It was about presence, recognition, and dignity restored in a moment that money alone could never buy. He placed a hand briefly on the veteran's shoulder, not for show, not for photographs, but in quiet affirmation. "You are seen. You matter." The cashier and other customers watched, their own emotions stirred. Someone in line blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. The woman with the basket of produce adjusted her scarf, her throat tight. Even the man in work boots, previously impatient and fidgety, now stood still, silently witnessing the human connection unfolding before him. The veteran's eyes glistened. A tear escaped, rolling down his cheek as he tried to compose himself, blinking rapidly to hold back more. He looked down at the bag again, then back at Ozzy. "I can't thank you enough," he whispered. "Really, Ozzy interrupted softly, shaking his head, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "No thanks needed," he said. "You've already done enough for the world. Today it's just my turn." For the first time that morning, the veteran exhaled fully, letting his shoulders relax. The tension, the uncertainty, the quiet shame of needing help, all of it began to dissolve. His pride remained, yes, but it was no longer a barrier. Instead, it was joined by something rarer: humility, trust, and the knowledge that even someone he'd never met could honor his life with kindness. Ozzy stepped back slightly, giving the veteran space, and nodded once. That simple gesture, so unassuming, held a weight far greater than any spotlight or stage could offer. It said, "You matter. Your sacrifices are not forgotten. And the world, even if only for a moment, can still be a good place." The veteran lowered the bag, his hands trembling, and finally found his voices. "I'll never forget this." Ozzy didn't respond with words. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes, the quiet action of paying for the groceries, and the hand on the shoulder had spoken everything necessary. In that moment, the store wasn't just a grocery store. It was a witness. And everyone there, veteran, customers, cashier, felt it, the rare, profound weight of genuine human connection. For a few seconds, the world outside could wait. For a few seconds, kindness was louder than judgment, and humility eclipsed fame. The human moment had arrived, and it would stay with everyone present forever. The moment passed, but its echoes lingered. The veteran stood holding his groceries, still trembling slightly, as the reality of what had just happened began to settle. He looked down at the bag in his hands, the coins he had counted so carefully now insignificant, and felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. Gratitude, relief, and something else. A quiet validation of a life spent in service flooded over him. Around him, the store seemed to breathe again. The line behind him exhaled, tension slowly melting away. People shifted back to their shopping, but their movements were slower now, more thoughtful. Whispers passed quietly among them.
"Did you see that? I can't believe it."
That was amazing. No one mentioned Ozzy Osbourne by name at first. They didn't need to. The story had already taken shape in the shared understanding of everyone who had witnessed it. Even the cashier, who had been caught between policy and conscience, seemed changed. Her hand still rested lightly on the counter, but her eyes shone with something beyond professionalism, an unspoken awareness that she had been part of a moment far bigger than any transaction she had handled before. She gave the veteran a small, respectful nod, and for the first time, a genuine smile touched her lips. The veteran turned slowly to glance at the other customers, their faces reflecting admiration, humility, and quiet awe. A young boy holding a small box of cereal looked up at his mother with wide eyes and whispered, "Mom, that was like a hero story." The mother nodded, speechless, letting the child absorb the weight of what he had seen. Outside the store, the ripple began to spread further. One witness pulled out their phone to share the story with a friend. Another would call a relative to describe the scene. The tale of kindness, dignity, and recognition, the quiet heroism of an unexpected figure stepping forward, would travel not as gossip, but as a reminder that humanity still exists in small, profound moments. For the veteran, the impact ran deeper than the groceries he now carried. The act of being truly seen, of having someone acknowledge his service and sacrifice without fanfare or judgment, restored a sense of worth that had been quietly eroded by years of struggle. Pride, often fragile, felt renewed. Relief and gratitude intertwined so completely that for a moment, the weight of a lifetime of hardship seemed to lift. Ozzy Osbourne had left the store already, stepping out into the ordinary day without a second thought for fame, cameras, or accolades. But the ripple of his action remained, quiet, persistent, and unmistakable. Everyone present had witnessed more than generosity. They had witnessed the power of empathy in its purest form. In that small corner store, lives had been touched in ways that could never be measured in dollars, and the story would live on, not because of celebrity, but because true humanity, when it acts, leaves a mark far stronger than spectacle ever could. The store returned to routine, but the memory of that moment, the hum of kindness, lingered in every corner, and everyone who was there, even briefly, carried it with them forever. Moments like this are rare, not because people are incapable of kindness, but because life moves too fast, and humanity is often buried under routine, indifference, and the pressure of our own concerns. In a small grocery store, under ordinary fluorescent lights, a veteran had faced what many of us fear: the quiet humiliation of needing help and not knowing how to receive it. It could have ended there, unnoticed, unremarked. Just another day in a world that too often ignores its quiet heroes. What makes this moment extraordinary is not the celebrity involved, but the human awareness behind the action. Ozzy Osbourne, a figure known for stage theatrics and larger-than-life persona, chose to step into the ordinary without spectacle. He didn't announce himself. He didn't make a show. He didn't ask for recognition. He saw a man in need, acknowledged his dignity, and acted. That choice, simple, immediate, and personal, turns an everyday interaction into something profound. It reminds us that real heroism doesn't always arrive on a stage. Sometimes it comes quietly, with a single decision to see someone, to act, and to restore their humanity in a world that too often overlooks it. The veteran was recognized not for fame or accomplishment, but for who he was, a person who had given much, who deserved respect and care, and who, for a fleeting moment, was allowed to stand tall again. This is why it resonates. It speaks to our shared need for empathy, for acknowledgement, for the understanding that every life matters, regardless of circumstance or public acclaim. It cuts across fame, wealth, or status. It is a lesson in humility for everyone who witnessed it. That impact is measured not by the applause or the cameras, but by the lives quietly touched. And it teaches something even broader: kindness is contagious. The line, the store, the people who watched, they all carry the ripple of this moment forward. The boy who whispered to his mother, the cashier who paused to absorb what she'd seen, the other customers who carried the memory home, all become part of a chain that reminds the world that compassion still exists, even in the smallest, most ordinary places. The story matters because it restores faith, not through spectacle, but through authenticity. It matters because it demonstrates the power of awareness, courage, and action. It matters because it challenges us to recognize moments of quiet heroism in our own lives, and perhaps to act ourselves. In the end, this is what makes the difference between a story that is watched and forgotten, and a story that lingers, a story that reminds us, in the simplest yet most profound way, that real humanity always leaves a mark. The veteran walked out of the store carrying his bag of groceries, still processing the quiet storm of kindness that had just unfolded. For him, it wasn't about the bread, the milk, or the extras Ozzy Osbourne had paid for. It was about being seen, about dignity restored, about the reminder that someone, even a stranger, could recognize his service, his sacrifices, and respond not with judgment but with action. The people in the store, now silent witnesses, remained rooted in their spots for a few moments longer. Their eyes met, unspoken understanding passing between them. They had seen something rare, something that couldn't be replicated by headlines or viral videos. It wasn't the celebrity moment that mattered. It was the humanity behind it. And that's why this story resonates. It's why it spreads. Because everyone watching, everyone hearing about it, can feel it. The quiet power of a single choice. The ripple effect of simple, thoughtful action. One man stepping forward, changing the course of someone else's day, and in doing so, reminding all of us that kindness doesn't require fame, money, or recognition. It only requires noticing and choosing to act. In a world that too often rewards noise, spectacle, and bravado, this moment reminds us that true impact is silent, authentic, and profound. Ozzy didn't need cameras. He didn't need applause. He didn't need anyone to witness, except for the one person who mattered most, the veteran who had already given so much. And in doing so, he left everyone else in the store changed. This is the kind of story that gets shared. Not because it's famous, not because it's flashy, but because it touches something deep in all of us. It's a story about seeing, about caring, about restoring faith in humanity when it feels like the world has forgotten how. So share it. Share it for the veterans, for the strangers, for the everyday heroes who go unnoticed. Share it for the quiet moments of courage and kindness that remind us we still have the power to make a difference. Share it because moments like this deserve to live far beyond one grocery store, one day, and one person's act of compassion. Because if there's one lesson here, it's this: humanity isn't about fame, it's about noticing, acting, and caring. And that's what changes everything. This story isn't just for today, it's for anyone who needs to believe, even for a moment, that kindness still exists. And that
Please
sometimes
take
a
this
single act of
for your
compassion
service.
can ripple
Thank you,
farther than
ma'am. That's
anyone
very
could
kind.
imagine.
It's the least I can do.